Every flight gets us another step closer to a fully operational Starship. Starship is the most powerful vehicle ever developed and the first design of a rocket that is capable of making life multiplanetary.
Starship will allow us to land humans on the moon again after more than half a century, fly the heaviest payloads ever flown, and ultimately fly humans further into space than ever before. Getting there will require us to fly frequently, which is why we're producing so fast. We already have hardware built and are preparing for our next several flights.
But the most important thing about Starship is that it's designed to be fully and rapidly reusable, and of course, reliable. We've been designing from day one to realize a vision of having an entire city of people on Mars, something we know will take launching millions of pounds of cargo and equipment into space spread across thousands of launches.
The faster we can learn now, the faster we can improve and evolve Starship to achieve this vision. And that brings us to today's flight test, the fourth of many that will get us one step closer to Mars. But before we dive into the details of today's test, let's do a quick rewind and talk about our last integrated flight test, Flight 3. On March 14th, Starship successfully lifted off at 8:25 a.m. Central Time from Starbase, Texas. It cleared the launch tower and went on to accomplish several major milestones and firsts. All 33 Raptor engines on the Super Heavy booster started up successfully and completed a full duration 2-minute and 41-second ascent burn.
Then we saw our second ever hot stage separation, powering down all but 3 of Super Heavy's Raptor engines and then igniting the ship's 6 Raptors to create separation. Next, Super Heavy completed its flip maneuver and ignited the 13 center engines for the boost back burn to send it towards its splashdown point in the Gulf of Mexico. All 13 engines ran successfully until 6 engines began shutting down, triggering an early end to the boost back.
After descent, we attempted the first ever Super Heavy landing burn, which uses the same 13 center engines that we used on boostback. Since 6 of those experienced the early shutdown in the boostback burn, we attempted the landing burn with the remaining 7 Raptors, and 2 of those 7 reached main stage ignition. In the end, contact was lost with the booster at approximately 462 meters in altitude over the Gulf of Mexico, just under 7 minutes into the mission.
Post-flight data reviews showed that the early boost back burn shutoff was most likely caused by filter blockage where oxygen is supplied to the engines. We saw a similar issue on Flight 2 and had added hardware to mitigate it, which worked to get us to our first ever landing burn attempt.
Now for today's flight, we upgraded those filters further and made some additional hardware and software changes to increase our chances of igniting all 13 engines for the landing burn. Now turning back to the Flight 3 ship, we saw all 6 Raptor engines start successfully and powered the vehicle to space, marking the first time we completed its full ascent burn.
While coasting, we completed some additional objectives, including the opening and closing of the payload door. We also transferred propellant between tanks inside the ship, which is a key test as we prepare for full ship-to-ship prop transfers in the future. Once we were into our coast, though, the ship gradually lost the ability to control its attitude or orientation, which is done with smaller thrusters around the spacecraft.
As a result, the vehicle experienced some unplanned rolling. It still flew on the planned trajectory, but losing attitude control triggered the flight computer to skip a planned relight of a single Raptor engine while on orbit. And then the moment that we all had been looking forward to for so long, as you can see here, the ship's re-entry from space. This was the first time that we were able to get real live flight data on things like heating and vehicle control during hypersonic re-entry, of which we will talk more about later.
Not having attitude control meant both protected and unprotected areas saw heating much higher than anticipated. But we were able to get live, high-definition views and real-time data during entry thanks to Starlink terminals on the ship, which itself was a widely successful test. This gave us confidence that we'll continue to get unparalleled insight into the ship's re-entry in order to rapidly improve.
And as they say, all good things must come to an end. And for Flight 3, this occurred when contact with the ship was lost at approximately 65 kilometers in altitude, roughly 50 minutes into the mission. After reviewing data from the flight, we found the most likely cause of the unplanned rolling seen during the ship coast phase and re-entry phase was blockage of valves that help control the smaller attitude control thrusters.
We upgraded these to make them more resilient and added some additional thrusters for redundancy. Overall, we learned a tremendous amount from that last flight, and capping it off with those re-entry views was truly an exciting end to the mission.
Incredible.
So back to today's test. Today's mission profile is similar to Flight 3, but we have new test objectives, the first of which is getting through the extreme heat of re-entry. About 27 minutes from now, Super Heavy will ignite its 33 Raptor engines and lift off from Starbase. A little more than 2.5 minutes into flight, the Super Heavy booster will separate from the ship in a hot stage separation, meaning that it'll light its engines while still attached to a partially lit booster. The booster will perform a flip maneuver, followed by a boost back burn. About 2 seconds after that burn ends, we'll jettison the booster's hot stage. As it heads back to Earth, the booster will attempt a landing burn before splashing down into the Gulf.
Meanwhile, the ship's engines will remain lit for just under 6 minutes during its ascent before shutting down for the coast phase. The ship will coast for about 40 minutes or so, reaching a peak altitude of 214 kilometers. And after its coast phase, the ship will attempt a controlled re-entry, including a flip maneuver and a landing burn, before splashing down in the Indian Ocean. Now, we say attempting because, again, this is a test, and nothing is guaranteed. As we mentioned earlier, the booster and the ship have to contend with some extreme conditions on re-entry.
For this flight test, we do not plan to recover any hardware from the booster or the ship. With the exception of Falcon, this is no different than what happens to most rockets flying today that are expended or fall into the ocean after completing their mission. Eventually, we will land and recover Starship boosters and ships, as we do today with Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy boosters. And in fact, we've landed 316 Falcon boosters to date.
Even though recovery is not planned, the telemetry and data we receive all the way to the end is what we're looking for, which will help us continue to build a rapidly reusable Starship for the future. In other words, the payload for this mission is data. It's also worth mentioning that the hot stage jettison is an off-nominal procedure that we're using as a temporary way to reduce the weight of the vehicle for its water landing today.
Yeah, exactly. Future designs give Super Heavy boosters a lighter weight integrated hot stage intended for full reusability, which will mitigate the need to jettison the hot stage. Okay, so now that we have a handle on today's flight test, let's check in with Dan. Dan, how's it going?
Hey, Jesse, and welcome everybody back to Starbase for yet another Starship launch. I'm coming to you live from the Raptor's nest behind the Mega Bay. I'm here with our Pad Red team and some of our flight controllers this morning. Everything has been going really smooth. We did have the red team going a little bit earlier to fix a ground side issue, but that was taken care of. That's why we slid a little bit later into our window. But as of right now, we are on track for liftoff at 7:50 a.m. Central Time. That's 12:50 UTC. As you can see, we are actively loading propellant onto Starship and Super Heavy. Those frost lines are ticking up as we load liquid methane, that's our fuel, liquid oxygen, that's our oxidizer, onto both vehicles. They're cryogenic, so they're subcooled to several hundred degrees below zero. Since Flight 3, we've made a few more upgrades, helping to bring Prop Farm 2.0 online. That's just going to help us to continue to shorten the amount of prop load time that we're going to need. We're also going to be using it for Launch Tower number 2, which is going to be coming to Starbase real soon. The faster we go, the less prop we're going to lose to boil off, and the better we can ensure things like temperatures are in the right range for Raptor startup. Now, those first two flights took about 90 minutes to load prop on board. That third, we knocked it all the way down to just 51 minutes. We're aiming for about 46 minutes of prop load time for eventually, hoping to get that down all the way to 40, which for some context, that's just 5 minutes more than we take to load Falcon 9, but we're doing it with 10 times the amount. So this morning, ship prop load started at T-minus 50 minutes, booster at T-minus 43 minutes. We're going to pause the ship main tank prop load in just a couple of minutes to do the header tanks, which are going to do that attempted ship landing burn. We expect the ship to close out all of its prop at about 3 minutes and 20 seconds before liftoff, and then booster at about 2:50. Now, our final countdown sequence is going to look very familiar. It's going to be the exact same as it was on Flights 2 and 3. So we'll light those engines, and then about 4 seconds later, we will actually see it lift off. But I mean, right now we are just under 23 minutes away from launch. We're not working any issues either with the vehicle, the range. Weather is 95% go, so not dealing with any winds or weather issues today. If we do have to scrub, our next attempt would probably be about 48 hours from now. It's all going to be driven by commodities and just how far we get into the count. But everything looking good for liftoff just about 22 and a half minutes from now. I'll check back in with you guys in a few minutes, and I'll send it back over to Kate and Jesse.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. Flight tests like today are the fastest possible route for us to dramatically improve Starship's capabilities. The Starship flying today has already seen a number of changes based on what we learned from Flight Test 3 in March, which was only 2.5 months ago. Development moves really fast here at SpaceX. Let's take a closer look at the iteration of the vehicle flying today. Starship is comprised of two elements, the ship, which has 6 Raptor engines, and the Super Heavy booster, which has 33 Raptor engines.
The current iteration of Starship is essentially an experimental vehicle flying for development. Starship 2 will be capable of carrying more than 100 tons to orbit, and Starship 3 will be able to handle more than 200 tons to orbit. Compared to Saturn V, the rocket that first took astronauts to the moon, Starship has more than twice the thrust. And with a few planned upgrades, Starship will have 3 times the thrust of Saturn V, plus the added benefit of full reusability. The amount of mass that we're able to launch per rocket is crucial to creating a self-sustaining city on Mars.
Now, to get a sense of how big Starship is, let's start with the average-sized human, which is about 2 meters high. And towering over our average human is the length of the Millennium Falcon, which comes in at 35 meters. Our Falcon 9 rocket with the payload fairing attached is double the size of the Millennium Falcon at 70 meters, and nearly twice the size of that is the fully integrated Starship at 121 meters tall. The ship is about 50 meters tall, and the Super Heavy booster alone stands 71 meters. Eventually, the ship and booster will get even taller.
Starship's first stage has a diameter roughly 2.5 times that of Falcon 9, and with 33 much larger Raptor engines, as you see there. I love this view because we don't have this view on our Falcon missions. This is looking up under the Super Heavy booster. Now, moving up the rocket, the ship features 6 Raptors, 3 sea-level engines and 3 vacuum engines, which, as the name suggests, are optimized to operate in the vacuum of space. And Starship is designed for vertical takeoff and landing on any hard surface. The ship is also outfitted with 4 flaps to help aerodynamically control the vehicle's attitude during atmospheric flight and enable a precise landing.
And in between the first and second stages is our hot stage, our newest separation technique, which we saw in action during flight tests 2 and 3. The body of Starship is wrapped in a heat shield made up of 18,000 hexagonal ceramic tiles designed to insulate the vehicle during atmospheric entry, where temperatures can be as high as 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit or over 1,400 degrees Celsius. Speaking of those heat shield tiles, re-entry was a pretty exciting first for our team, and Starlink allowed us to gather critical data about this stage of flight.
Reusability significantly reduces the cost of space travel, and it's the key to making humans a multi-planet species. Starship is designed for rapid reusability, which means the booster and the ship need to re-enter Earth's atmosphere and land back precisely at the launch site.
With each flight test, we gather more and more data to help hone Starship's re-entry capabilities. The more information we have from each flight, the quicker Starship development can proceed. One way to gather more information is to improve communication throughout the flight, including re-entry, where historically there has been a communications blackout.
To do this, we equipped Starship with Starlink terminals to expand its communication capabilities. The Starlink terminals are those 4 black squares that you see there on top of the ship. Starlink is the world's largest constellation of highly advanced satellites operating in a low orbit around the Earth, providing high-speed internet on Earth and now in space.
Starship is designed to have a large surface area to create considerable drag during re-entry. Traveling at about 27,000 kilometers per hour, or almost 17,000 miles per hour, Starship compresses the air in front of it, causing the temperature of the air to rise and ionize, turning it into plasma. This plasma layer interferes with communications by absorbing and reflecting radio waves, leading to the communications blackout we've seen historically with spacecraft during atmospheric reentry. With Starship, most of that plasma is built up around the front and sides of the vehicle, leaving an opening downstream where we're able to point our Starlink terminals. And with Starlink also operating at a higher frequency than traditional space-based communications, we're able to power through any residual plasma to provide real-time video and data at high speeds back to the ground.
Super cool. We actually got to see this in action on Starship's last test, Flight 3, which had the first ever live HD video of a spaceship re-entering the atmosphere. SpaceX engineers were able to gather data on the performance of Starship as it re-entered the atmosphere and watched the heat shield in action. Now, the physics of re-entry are extremely hard to replicate perfectly on the ground, so access to this data is an invaluable tool for rapid iteration. In fact, one cool observation from that Flight 3 was seeing how shock waves form at different parts of the vehicle and how they interact to put pressure on the ship, especially the flaps. This is really valuable for Starship since no spacecraft has ever flown with 4 movable flaps like what we use for aerodynamic control. Starship's greatest strength will be rapid and reliable reusability, and Starlink has become a critical tool to make that a reality.
Over the next few flights, we'll continue to improve the Starlink performance on Starship, eventually enabling more views and enabling more data to be transmitted in real time. And we'll keep experimenting during entry. You might have noticed a few tiles missing or looking different near the bottom of Starship. We intentionally placed one thin tile and removed 2 tiles completely. In their place, we now have sensors to see how hot things get without the tiles in those locations, while also testing some backup thermal protection options. Ideally, we expect Starship's reentry to improve on each flight, thanks in part to this wealth of new data. But if getting to space is hard, returning from space is even harder.
That's right. No one has ever succeeded in creating a fully and rapidly reusable heat shield. So we could see some spectacular failures before we get this right. But with communications improving on each flight, we will continue to gather more and more data to inform our development. We're now about 15 and a half minutes until our next liftoff attempt. In the meantime, let's take a look at some of the technology we have in development as we prepare to head to the moon in future missions.
Starship will be taking astronauts to the moon as part of NASA's Artemis program. Next year, we plan to demonstrate ship-to-ship propellant transfer, which will be important for our upcoming moon missions. Today, we're actively testing a lot of hardware that will make exploring the moon possible. One recent series of tests brought together the key pieces we'll see when landing back on the moon: Starship, spacesuits, and astronauts.
Together with Axiom and NASA, our teams put 2 astronauts in pressurized Axiom spacesuits and practiced the first steps of going to the lunar surface. The team used test builds of a Starship airlock, as you see there, and elevator to gather data on how well future Artemis astronauts will be able to move around once fully suited. Tests like this are incredibly helpful for engineers designing these systems, as they have the opportunity to get feedback directly from experienced astronauts Peggy Whitson, who is on the right of this photo, and Doug Wheelock, who's on the left. You can see them in action during this elevator test.
SpaceX will perform one uncrewed demonstration flight before NASA's Artemis 3 mission, which will be the first human surface expedition since 1972. After those first expeditions, we'll be ready to fly more people along with everything it takes to build a moon base. In many ways, Artemis feels like an extension of the human spaceflight work SpaceX and NASA have been partnering on for some time now. In fact, we just celebrated the anniversary of the Demo 2 mission.
That's right. Just 4 years ago, on May 30th, 2020, SpaceX launched the first crewed test flight of our Crew Dragon spacecraft. Dragon carried NASA astronauts Douglas Hurley and Robert Behnken to the International Space Station in the first crewed orbital spaceflight launch from the United States since the final space shuttle mission in 2011. and the first ever operated by a commercial provider. You can see Bob and Doug there on your screen. That was certainly a memorable day for all of us here at SpaceX, one that we fondly think back on. And it's exciting to think about Starship being the next to take its first astronauts to the moon. In tandem with Starship development, all of our operational human spaceflight missions are helping us prepare for those future trips to the moon. Our upcoming private astronaut mission, Polaris Dawn, you can see the crew there on your screen. They will play a big role in testing procedures that will be relevant to our moon and eventually Mars missions. We're looking forward to the third Polaris Dawn mission, which will be the first crewed Starship flight.
The Polaris Dawn crew will attempt to reach the highest apogee ever flown by a spacecraft, and they'll also be performing a spacewalk or extravehicular activity from SpaceX's newly designed spacesuit. They'll also be testing space-based communications, which will be critical to future deep space missions. The Polaris Dawn mission is currently targeted to launch no earlier than July of this year, so stay tuned because that is going to be a very exciting mission to watch. In the meantime, at T-minus 12 minutes, let's check back in with Dan on today's countdown.
Hey, thanks, Jesse. Everything continues to go real smoothly. It's been a real quiet day so far. The board looks really clean, not tracking any impediments to a launch just under 12 minutes from now. Prop load's continuing. Looking at the numbers real quick, we're about 85% full on the ship. We did pause to start filling those header tanks on ship. Again, those are the two smaller tanks in the very top of the nose cone that we're going to use for that attempted landing burn with ship. And with the booster, we're just at about 76% or so on our methane and LOX, so getting pretty full there. Those are going to continue down to about 3 minutes and 20 seconds before liftoff. That's when we'll close out all the prop on the ship. And then T-minus 2 minutes and 50 seconds on the booster. A lot of work also going on in the background. Our range safety teams working to make sure the area, not just around the pad, but in the sea space out in the Gulf, and also in the anticipated entry point in the Indian Ocean are clear. We're not tracking any blockers, any boats, anything like that in the zone right now, but their work literally continues right up until those last couple of minutes. So they're working pretty hard to make sure everything stays clear. But right now the range is green. I already talked about it in the beginning. It looks a little bit cloudy, but weather not a concern today. Really light winds.
Mas ainda não tem uma definição assim do traje extraveicular assim que
when we started this morning, and that's held.
Ser usado na Lua ainda.
Continuing to look really good for launch so far. The pad itself is getting ready. Reminder that we're going to light those engines about 4 minutes before it actually takes off, so you'll see them start. The 33 engines on Super Heavy start to light prior to that T0, and then about 2 seconds after we'll start to see first motion. But everything looking great, just coming up on 10 minutes until launch, getting excited down here, ready to feel the rumble. I'll send it back to you guys over in Hawthorne.
Thanks, Dan. Teams are also getting excited here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. There is a pretty large crowd now gathering outside of Mission Control, located just behind Jesse and I. Now, actually, you can see it there on your screen.
O pessoal da SpaceX, todo feliz porque está aparecendo na programação. Isso aí é do centro deles na Califórnia.
Our fourth flight test. Now, as a reminder on that note, today is just a test, the fourth of many future flight tests of Starship before it becomes fully operational. So, whatever the outcome and however far we get,
logo, a gente tem lançamento, viu?
This rapid, iterative development approach has been the basis for all of SpaceX's major innovative advancements, including Falcon, Dragon, and Starlink.
Today, we've successfully landed Falcon 9 boosters 316 times, changing humanity's understanding of what's possible when it comes to rocket reusability. And even though we are not recovering the booster or ship today, test flights like these provide critical data for every phase of flight, which will get us closer and closer to full reusability, and we have a lot more tests planned for this year. When we start recovering Starship boosters, we'll want them to return to the launch site for a quicker turnaround, which you can see in this animation on your screen. And that's when the tower reveals its dual purpose. After launch, the arms or chopsticks on the tower will help guide the booster into position to ensure a precision landing.
Vai dar bom.
And our goal for the near future is to have 4 launch towers, 2 in Cape Canaveral in Florida, and they will look very similar to the ones that you see here in this animation. As we know, we find that our renderings tend to end up looking really similar to real life. So while this is a rendering, we do know we can look forward to this in the future. Like I said, we're going to have 2 at Cape Canaveral in Florida and 2 located at Starbase. Starbase will continue to be used for flight tests, and the towers at the Cape will come online as we prepare to fly operational Starship missions. In fact, we recently upgraded the actuators in the chopsticks, which are responsible for swinging those arms in for a catch. And we'll be testing an operational step on this flight by moving the chopsticks to the catch position immediately after Starship flies away.
That's going to be really incredible to see. As we mentioned, we have a lot more tests planned for this year, so we need a lot more hardware. Today we have ships and super heavy boosters built and either ready to launch or in testing for the next several flights, with more coming off of the production line as SpaceX's Star Factory continues to grow. The latest phase of the factory currently under construction will come online this summer, giving us several 100,000 more square feet of space.
When you step into this factory, it is truly inspirational. My heart jumps out of my chest every time I'm there. Now, this will enable us to increase our production rate significantly as we build toward our long-term goal of producing 1 ship per day. And coming off the production line soon, Starship version 2. Now, with all that being said, let's check back in with Dan for the latest as we head into the terminal count.
Hey, thanks, Kate. Everything still looks great. We're getting ready to launch. We are just under 6.5 minutes away. You can see when we throw up the graphics for prop load that we're almost closed out. Ship more than 90% full. Those header tanks are done. And then the boosters coming up on 90% real soon. So we're going to see those close out in the next couple of minutes. Ship's going to end at about 3 minutes and 20 seconds. It'll be fully loaded. And then booster at about 2 minutes and 50 seconds. After all the props loaded on, we go through a lot of steps to safe ground systems. You're doing things called pushbacks, where you're just clearing all of those lines on the ground of propellant before we lift off. But once we're done, we're going to have 10 million pounds of liquid propellant on board Starship to help power the most powerful vehicle ever designed. If we do hold, we have a built-in hold gate at T-minus 40 seconds. We can hold there for about 30 minutes or so today. If we need to wait for final pressure checks or if we have anything on the range, anything like that. Did just get that the range is green, so we are coming up 5 minutes and 20 seconds away. We are not planning to hold at T-minus 40 unless we trip some kind of hold alarm, something like that. So we could blow right through that gate to launch. Don't be shocked if we hold at T40 though. And if we do, we can hold for a couple of minutes and then keep going. Our window is open all the way until 9 a.m. today.
Now, once we pass through T-minus 40 seconds, a number of events will occur in rapid succession. The ground spin and ignition systems will come up to flight pressure, and the ship will go to internal power.
Now, after that, the quick disconnect arm lockout is removed in preparation for retraction shortly after T0. Gas lines connected to the booster and ship are vented down, and once we pass T-minus 40 seconds, we still have the ability to recycle the count under certain conditions back to T-minus 40 seconds and hold there to assess what happened and if we can proceed again to T0.
However, once the water for the deflector system begins flowing at T-minus 10 seconds, any issue after that would be an automatic scrub for the day, as teams would need to refill the deflector's water tanks, as well as the lock storage tanks at the tank farm before making another attempt. So, as Dan mentioned earlier, we are not planning to hold at the optional T-minus 40 seconds mark. That moment basically is what would allow teams to wait for final checkouts or assess prop levels or avionics, vehicle pressurization. Beautiful day. Of course, we have some clouds billowing from the locks there.
Yeah, and again, a reminder that the payload for this mission is data, and our primary goal is to get ship through
Ah, tá na aba da live.
The extreme heat of re-entry
Eles
today.
dão essas travadinhas
We're
assim,
very
acaba dando
excited to
delay
see
mesmo.
that. We did get very
Mas o delay
close
da
on
minha
flight
live,
3, so
da
I'm excited to
minha
see
live
how
grande.
these iterations that we've made to the vehicle
Grande
will help
mesmo.
improve our
O delay da
chances
minha live é
of
grande.
success today.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just as a reminder for the booster, now we are not attempting to recover any hardware today, both either on ship or booster.
Tipo assim,
For the booster, we will be attempting to perform a landing burn to have a soft splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico. We made some improvements from our Flight 3 learnings, so hopefully that will work and we'll see a successful soft splashdown. For the ship, we're hoping to demonstrate controlled re-entry, including a flip maneuver and landing burn, and that will be followed by splashdown in the Indian Ocean. That is the same target as we had on Flight 3, so everything should look pretty similar in that regard. And we just heard the call out there that all prop load is closed out, so at this point, there is like 10 million pounds of propellant on board Starship, which is incredible.
This is getting very exciting. We are just about 2 minutes away from T0.
Dois minutos para o lançamento.
And as Jesse just said, we are under 2 minutes away. So prop load is complete. All the fill drain lines into ship and booster have closed. Right now we're doing the pushback, so clearing out all those ground lines of propellant.
O Mosca ali embaixo tá com o fio dele.
Coming up on that T-40 mark. Again, not planning to hold. If we do, or if we get a hold after we pass it, we can snap back to that T-40.
O pai desse moleque tem mais brinquedo
for about 30 minutes or so if any other issues crop up. Once we pass T-40, a lot of things happen, both on the vehicle and the ground. It's running a lot of its own self-checkouts, venting different tanks and pressure lines throughout the vehicle. We essentially built that 40 seconds, as that's about how much time it takes for the vehicle to take all of those actions, which is why we hold there. But all of that happens automated. You do a final checkout of the TVC, the thrust vector control, how we're going to steer. And then we see liftoff. So we're under
50 segundos
away. $45 seconds and
40.
counting.
Good event game at.
All right, now as we close in, we are past the 40-second mark. So let's listen in.
30.
Flight Director Ty Huntington's going to take us through one more time for a Starship liftoff.
20.
T-minus 15.
Começou.
10,
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignição. Ignição dos motores. Lançamento. Decola Starship. Ficou, partiu. Opa, um falhou. Subiu, um falhou. Um falhou. Um apagou. Um Raptor subiu apagado. Mas partiu.
All right, 30 seconds into flight. The rumbles are still building here in the Raptors
motor engasgado, não ligou.
We're seeing 32 out of 33 engines lit on the Super Heavy right now. Coming up shortly is going to be
segundos subindo.
that maximum aerodynamic pressure as we go uphill
Olha que
on the
bonito.
vehicle.
Tá subindo. Tá subindo.
Max Q.
Max Q.
All right, we just passed through Max Q, so we're going to continue on up. We still have about a minute and 30 seconds until we get to stage separation. Starship now
Não, mas o motor só não faz muita diferença, então vai tudo de boa. Então fiquem tranquilos hoje. Isso era condensação, gente. Como as condições do tempo são favoráveis, a condensação vai ser gigantesca atrás do Starship hoje, do Super Heavy. 20 km de altitude, 2.000 km por hora. É o max Q, máxima pressão aerodinâmica, né? Caraca, olha as nuvens, tá bonito pra caramba na imagem, ó. 1,50, 30 km de altitude, 2.700 km por hora.
And then the ship will separate itself. All but the 3 center engines on the booster are going to shut down.
2 minutos de voo.
So the booster never stops its thrust
28
while we go
km.
through this hot stage maneuver. After that, the booster is going to do its flip, start heading back, and then the ship will be on its own power on its way to space. So that should be coming up in just about 30
tudo
seconds
tranquilo.
from now. As of right now, still looking in like 32 out of 33 Raptors
Aquela cambalhotinha, né?
on the booster.
2 minutos e meio, 55 km de altitude, 4.800 km por hora. Tudo normal. 5.000 km, 61 km de altitude. Vou preparar para separação logo logo. Shutdown, desligamento do booster, separação.
Stage separation confirmed.
Boost back burn, start up.
Separação com sucesso, gente. Deu tudo certo.
Houston.
Ignição. Boost back burn começou. Starship 85 km e 5.900 km por hora. 3 minutos e 20 segundos de voo.
Acquisition signal, Stennis.
Tá tudo dando certo e o boost back burn tá indo tudo tranquilo até agora. 98 km de altitude, 6.400 km por hora da Starship. 3 minutos e 40 segundos de voo. Olha a nuvem de condensação ali atrás. Tá tudo tranquilo, tudo indo tranquilamente. Desligamento dos motores do Super Heavy. Exceto os centrais foram desligados. Deu tudo certo. Starship a 7.200 km por hora, 115 km de altitude. Separação do interstage do Super Heavy. Foi liberado. Hot stage foi separado. Starship a 8.200 km por hora, 126 km de altitude. 4 minutos e 38 segundos de voo. A curvatura. Pega régua.
Will coast for about 40 minutes or so up to an altitude of 214 kilometers.
Mexicano deve estar gostando de ver lá, bem do lado.
A controlled re-entry, including a flip maneuver and a landing burn, just before splashing down in the Indian Ocean.
9.400 km por hora, 135 km de altitude, 5 minutos e 6 segundos de voo.
Good for the ship, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. At this point in time, as you can see, we have no engines lit on the booster. It is coasting back toward the Gulf of Mexico for a water landing.
Logo a gente vai ter o pouso do Super Heavy na... Eu não lembro onde vai ser o pouso dessa vez, eu acho que vai ser na água mesmo. Vai ser na água, isso vai ser na água. É tudo normal na Starship. 11.600 km por hora, 142 km de altitude, 5 minutos e 48 segundos de voo.
These views have been looking incredible.
Super Heavy tá 69 km, 68, 67, tá descendo rápido. 3.000 km por hora, 2.400, 3.500, tá acelerando.
The primary goal today is to do a landing burn and a splashdown in the water. And we are
Descendo.
just about 30 seconds away from that landing burn expecting to begin. And an incredible view from the
Olha a seção
portion of the
do...
booster. This is basically on top of
A
the Super
seção
Heavy
do
booster,
topo
where
do
we
Super
have
Heavy.
jettisoned that hot stage. So now we can see this incredible view of
Bonito
Earth as it's
demais,
making
gente.
its way back down
Muito legal,
to the
muito
Gulf
legal.
of Mexico. Right now, the booster is
Ó.
using the 4 hypersonic grid fins to guide
Olha
itself
o
through
plasma da
atmospheric
reentrada.
re-entry.
Muito louco.
And we are expecting that landing burn here.
Isso aí é o plasma da reentrada. Gente, muito bom, muito bom. Descendo rápido.
And we will be
2.600, 2.500, 2.400, 7 km, 6,
This is a great view. On
5,
your left-hand side is a view.
4.
Is 3 views from the booster, and your
Acho que vai
right-hand side a
bater.
view from the ship.
Acho que vai. Ih, vai
And
dar
you can
ruim,
see
não vai
those
dar não,
grid
vai dar
fins
não,
on
vai
your
dar não, vai
left-hand
dar não, vai dar
screen,
não. Vai dar não,
rotating and
vai dar não.
turning.
Ligou, ligou
To
tudo,
guide
ligou,
the
ligou, ligou,
booster.
ligou.
There's that landing
Vai bater. Eita, vai pousar. Vai pousar, vai pousar. Tá chegando, tá chegando. Tá chegando, tá chegando, tá chegando. Chegando. Nossa, tocou na água. Vai tombar. Tocou na água. Tombando. Vai cair. Perdeu o sinal. Sensacional, muito bom, muito bom. Acho que ele detonou quando ele tombou.
Ship has entered terminal guidance.
Rapaz, muito bom, muito bom, muito bom. Nossa, mas ele freou com tudo. Imagina a força G dele. A força G dessa freada, gente.
Now the next milestone is coming up in about under a minute. Ship is going
Olha.
to shut off its Raptor engines,
Ship engine cut off.
which we see right there.
Shutdown dos Raptor Vacuum da
As we
Starship.
mentioned before, today's test flight
Olha
is
só
not an
os
orbital flight,
3
but
Raptors
rather
centrais estão
one
funcionando.
that demonstrates the Starship's orbital capability.
25 e 900 km por hora, 149 km de altitude, 8 minutos e 29
So
segundos de
right
voo.
now we are under power with just the 3 center Raptor engines.
26 mil km por hora, desligamento dos Raptors Center.
Also successfully cut off.
Aê! Estamos na fase de coast.
Ship FDS.
Nossa, mas foi bom demais. Foi sensacional isso aqui,
Terminal
gente.
orbit insertion.
Oh, there's great news there. The call out we were hoping to hear. Amazing views once again from Starship. We have our second Starship.
Tá tendo uma purga de combustível ali, é normal, gente.
Being brought to us by Starlink, which is on board the ship. Dan, what an incredible.
A purga de propelente é normal, acontece.
We got another ship in space.
I'm like still jumping up and down. I'm like,
Expected loss signal.
this
Status.
whole building was going absolutely insane when we saw the booster hit the water. I mean,
Não, ele tomba mesmo, é porque ele pousa na água, o Super Heavy.
everybody's just been putting in insane
Pousa na água, ele tomba.
everything to make this
Só pra... Isso é normal, era o previsto mesmo acontecer isso.
one of these we're seeing something.
Olha o gelinho soltando, olha o gelinho, olha o gelinho.
To see the hot stage jettison and the booster in the water, but just to recap real quick over everything that's happened. So we lifted off at 7:50 a.m. only 9 minutes ago. How has it only been 9 minutes? 7:50 a.m. Central at 12:50 UTC. We saw 32 of the 33 Raptor engines on Super Heavy make the ascent. We had successful cutoff, successful hot stage.
Não, possivelmente ele se desfez, entendeu? No, na hora do tombo, sabe? Porque, né, o tamanho do negócio e bate na água muito rápido. Tchau, tchau. Ah, era intencional sim, dessa vez foi. Era pousar na água e ele tombar. A intenção dessa vez era tocar na água. Tocar na água, tocando na água, tava de boa. É pelo... Nossa, mas ele desacelerou muito rápido. Muito rápido, desacelerou muito rápido.
Successful orbital insertion, so it's right where it needs to be, and is now going to continue on.
Vamos ajustar aqui.
Until it comes to reentry. But I mean,
vou ajustar uma coisa aqui para ver se eu consigo dar uma melhorada aqui. Vou ajustar aqui. Calma aí.
in the water. So,
Tudo errado aqui, ficou zoado a
still to
tradução.
come. Ship now on its way to its primary objective of entry. That's going to be coming up in just under 40
Estado
minutes
de
from now.
boa.
So a lot still to
Não,
come,
não.
but,
Então,
wow,
tipo, não tem como recuperar mesmo, então
So,
tem como recuperar o estágio.
can't wait to see what entry's
Eles
gonna
vão
show
descartar
us,
mesmo de qualquer
but
jeito e
that launch
tocando na
was
água já bastava.
incredible. Back over to you
Tocando na
guys.
água, pronto, deu certo. Basicamente isso.
Wow.
Mas eu acho que hoje o maior teste vai ser a reentrada da Starship. Pra ver se o escudo dela consegue resistir à atmosférica. E se ela consegue se manter no controle, né? Porque da outra vez ela entrou rodopiando de um jeito. Ela tá girando um pouco. Ela tá com um pouquinho de rotação. Se vocês repararem bem, tá rotacionando. Ela tá de ladinho. Ela tá de lado, ela tá rotacionando. Eu vejo a reentrada. Tá dando umas... Caiu o sinal. Acontece. Era de se esperar que ia cair o sinal.
Re-entry, flip maneuver, landing burn, and splashdown.
Tem uma queda no sinal, acontece. dar uma reprise aqui pra gente. E não quer reprisar, olha lá. Obrigado, Twitter, por ser essa coisa horrível. Nossa. Tá descendo. Meu Deus. Quase 3 mil pessoas assistindo a live SpaceX. Já tá entrando em posição já de reentrada. Quase na hora do grande momento. Nossa, eu dei uma cagada violenta aqui, gente.
Plus 49 minutes, the ship will re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. As a reminder, the primary goal of today's flight test is for ship to make it through the extreme heat of re-entry.
Tá se aproximando,
This is
gente.
typically a portion of flight where we don't have communications with the spacecraft because it's re-entering at or around orbital velocity, which is about 8 kilometers per second or roughly 5 miles per second. At those speeds, the spacecraft
Essa altura já tem uma massa de ar considerável já para poder ir.
Plasma field around the vehicle. That blanket of plasma distorts, as you can see.
Então a gente vai acompanhar, a gente tem mais ou menos como vai ser o processo. Agora é questão dela conseguir manter a estabilidade dela enquanto ela desce. Como posso dizer, sem rodopiar igual da última vez.
Yeah, that's right, Kate. And Starlink's what's really allowing us to capture as much data as possible, especially through this re-entry. Updated animation landing burn. I hope we get to see it for real today.
Eu queria ver a câmera igual daquela outra vez. Conforme ele vai chegando mais perto, perceber o movimento da chip. As nuvens passando lá embaixo.
The data is the payload on these flights. So as much as we can learn, that's just going to pay dividends on all of our future flights and help us get Starship to an operational phase. Re-entry,
os outros voos, a intenção era só entrar e bater na água. Dessa vez, eles querem fazer o flip também. Flip manobra. Mas, para isso, ela tem que existir a reentrada. Então, vamos acompanhando aqui.
We're expecting to be able to get data from Starlink thanks to its high frequency and kind of the orientation and everything of Starship all the way through re-entry. And then got a new view here. We have 2 external views. We have this one on flight through. We've got 2 for this one.
Eu vi o gelo se desprendendo ali por causa do arrasto. Vai vendo que o gelo se desprende e ele sobe. É um arrasto residual, né?
Huge shout out to the AVI and the software teams.
Mas aparentemente a chip vai estar mais estável nesse voo.
Because it looks cool, but this provides an incredible insight into re-entry.
Olha, tem terra ali embaixo.
You know, historically, a really
tá passando por onde, será?
The physics of re-entry are
tem um terreno ali embaixo, ó. Se vocês repararem bem, então terreno ali embaixo, terra ali embaixo. Até um rio ali, mas se ela estiver indo por... Se ela estiver indo pelo mesmo trajeto, ela deve estar passando em Madagascar. Possivelmente isso aí é Madagascar.
That's what a ship is experiencing as it goes through. It's moving through the atmosphere at, you know, more than 5 miles a second and heating up to thousands of degrees. So just having visual representation, just being able to see what's happening is incredibly valuable. So these views are going to be through Starlink.
Gente, a costa de Madagascar, a costa sul de Madagascar.
Olha lá. Looking back, so if you see it rotating around. That's because, again, it's embedded in one of those forward flaps. So as
Quando a câmera começa a mexer, como ela tá presa no flap, é porque o flap começa a se mover para poder mantendo a estabilidade da chip na entrada.
This view is going to move around as the flap does. And then the other one we had a little bit earlier is looking at one of the other forward flaps on the other side. Eventually, we're going to keep adding more cameras to Starship, get a couple of different views from the outside of all the different areas, and then also eventually to be able to see payloads once they're deployed. So a lot more exciting stuff coming up in the future. But right now, we're getting closer to re-entry. We're going to be moving at hypersonic speeds at more than 5 times the speed of sound. We're going to see that plasma start to build. So, Kate, Jesse, excitement coming up.
Yeah, as you can see with that view on your screen, again, high def brought to us by Starlink. We can see the plasma
começou. Começou a formação de plasma, gente. Começou a formação de plasma.
Let's talk a little bit about how Starship will survive re-entry, hopefully, and control itself.
Exactly. We've been talking about this entire flight test. There's 18,000 hexagonal ceramic tiles surrounding the bottom portion or the Earth-facing side of the ship.
A partir de 100 km já o bicho começa a pegar. Mas isso é um atrito bem residual, assim, por causa da compressão dos gases, eles começam a emitir luz. Então, ainda não começou a desaceleração, ele vai continuar acelerando um pouco até a pressão, até a densidade dos gases atmosféricos é bem maior.
Those flaps are not moving as much as they were on
ele segue acelerando,
so that is a great sign, right? We had unplanned
ficando mais intenso, conforme ele vai descendo, vai ficando mais intenso.
Additional thrusters, and we can see that they're working well, and we have a much more stable view. So those flaps, there's 4 of them, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom.
Ainda tá acelerando
they're made out of stainless steel. And yeah, they help steer the ship, which, as we can see, the plasma continuing to build. Now, if the ship survives re-entry, it will have to perform a flip maneuver, as well as a landing burn. We saw this demonstrated in a couple of high-altitude flight tests back in like 2020, 2021. Similarly,
temperatures increasing on the nose within expected ranges.
Great news there. It sounds like the temperatures that we are getting during this point, which again, we usually don't get during spaceflight because of this plasma. We're getting this live. This is great news. So similarly to, for example, the serial number 10 test that we saw a couple years ago,
parou de
we're
aumentar a
hoping to
velocidade
duplicate
agora.
that again today. Hopefully we will see it live.
Começou a reduzir a velocidade, agora o atrito está mais, o arrasto está maior já. Vamos ir reduzindo aos poucos a velocidade. Está abaixando a velocidade, está indo. É incrível estar conseguindo transmitir durante a entrada.
We've designed Starship to land on Mars where there are no runways or other humans to help out. We also want rapid reusability, so we're doing...
The vehicle is passing through 85 kilometers altitude. The flaps have control of the vehicle.
Incrível.
Great news. Flaps have control of the vehicle. That's exactly what we want to hear for this flight test.
Yeah.
Again, we are going to be doing a propulsive landing instead of a more traditional means like parachutes. And we are expecting re-entry to
achei que
begin
travou,
here
mas ela
in
tá muito
just about a
estabilizada na
minute.
reentrada. Gente, olha isso.
An awesome view that we have here.
Starship remains on a good entry trajectory.
This is the same view that we had
A velocidade tá reduzindo bem, gente. Olha, tá aumentando.
from the coast phase. Again, this is looking at the side of one of the flaps.
Foi mais ou menos nessa altitude que perderam o sinal da última Starship e a velocidade está reduzindo. Já tá tão estável que parece ali atrás dá pra ver um pouco o gás ali atrás. Está tão estável. Não, aquilo ali é normal. Aquilo ali é normal.
And that flip maneuver should occur around about 10 minutes
Mas tá tudo
before
bem até agora.
splashdown. And
Incrível
such
isso.
incredible views that we're
Starship is
getting.
approaching peak heating region.
Great call
Tem
outs
alguns
there.
detritos ali atrás.
Yeah, these views are absolutely
incomum.
astounding.
Nose temperatures
A
continue
gente
to
costuma
rise
sair
within
alguns
expected
pedacinhos
region.
do escudo assim, mas é normal.
And in your bottom right-hand corner, you can also follow along with the altitude of ship as it's
Por
returning
volta
back
dos
to Earth.
70, 60 quilômetros. É o 50, a entrada é bem tensa.
So once again, this view is basically looking down
Conforme for
into
reduzindo a
the plasma
velocidade,
blanket
melhor.
that is building up around
Famosos 3
the
minutos de terror.
exterior of Starship. It is traveling, as you can
Só
see
3
on your
minutos.
screen. You can
Ela
look
tem
in
que
the bottom
resistir.
right-hand corner and see how fast it's going, how high it
Gente,
is, as well as
fantástico.
the general orientation.
Fantástico.
Again, we're seeing a lot more stability, a lot more control here on this flight, which is great. It shows that the iterations, the learning.
Starship is now in expected peak heating region.
All right, great news there, telling us that this is basically the hottest point that Starship should get during its reentry. Now, the heat shield is working with the atmosphere for some free braking, okay? The atmosphere is helping to slow the Starship down.
Yeah, exactly. We're not using any engines or thrust to slow the vehicle down. Exactly what Kate mentioned. We're just using the atmosphere and those heat shield tiles protecting the vehicle as it's coming through that high heat temperature.
Yeah. Now, this is another one of those moments that we have
Que o
been
ponto mais
waiting
quente
for.
da Starship
Right now,
é
the
o
ship
nariz.
is currently re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and by all looks and all call-outs that we're hearing on the net, it is doing pretty well. Now, we do not plan to recover the spacecraft today, but rapid and reliable reusability is the ultimate goal.
Ela sobrevive, gente. Espero que ela sobreviva.
Just pausing to just take in this incredible new and different view that we're seeing. We did get a similar view in Flight 3, but again, the vehicle did lose a little bit of its control, attitude control, and this is a very stable view. This is great. This is exactly what we want, and we are hearing that we're getting expected call-outs.
Absolutely.
Starship is seeing half
Segue
G of
ainda.
acceleration,
Travou não,
remains on a good entry
tá prosseguindo a
trajectory.
reentrada.
You know, it's incredible to look at this photo and wonder, wait, is it real? Is it frozen? You know, we can see the, so I was just going to say we
Those
can.
temperatures have stopped increasing.
Oh, that is great news. The temperature is no longer building. But I was saying, we have a little bit of indication there. We can see that streaking that occurs and tells us that this is indeed a true view. So once again, we are looking basically through the plasma that is building up around the exterior of the ship.
And I still cannot get over that we are getting a live view of re-entry right now, live on your screen. Again, we've said this over and over, but all thanks
Já
to
reduziu em
Starlink,
quase 3.000
we are able to use
km/h de
Starlink
velocidade
in
já.
space, which we're getting this incredible data. And not only just the data from the sensors, but getting live imagery of what is actually happening, which is great, which we've never been able to do live before.
Right. Now, just a quick future outlook here. So in about, let's see, at T plus about 1 hour and 2 minutes, we should hear a call out for entry transonic. That means that the ship is going near the speed of sound. And then about a minute after that, we'll hear another call out saying entry subsonic, meaning that the ship is going below the speed of sound. So these are all continued indications that the atmosphere, right, as the ship comes back down, it is getting through the more dense part of the atmosphere, and that atmosphere is helping to push against the vehicle, and those heat shields are protecting the vehicle during this high heat period.
Olha lá. Uma coisa.
Yeah, Kate, Jesse, we're starting to see as the atmosphere gets denser, you're starting to see a few more particles.
Só tem essa câmera até agora, eles não viraram a câmera.
You can see, you're looking down at the aft end of the ship in the top left, and you're seeing essentially the flame build up as we go through reentry. You've been hearing the call-outs. They're tracking things like temperatures in the nose cone.
Uma pegada ali embaixo.
We're right where we modeled them to be, which is really cool to see and to see in real time. But we're coming up. We're at about 67 kilometers in altitude. Our last signal with the ship on Flight 3 was at 65, so we should be making it past that point shortly.
Já tá mudando a cor do aço. Ó, eita, deu uma pegada ali. A cor do aço já tá mudando aos poucos, ó, se vocês repararem, ó.
And our flaps have been steering the
Tá
way
mudando de
so
cor
far.
o aço por causa do
Once we
calor
get
já.
through transonic, that's when you've
Mas é
got
normal.
essentially
Raptor landing bird.
different areas around the vehicle where the air is either moving faster or slower than the speed of sound. We'll eventually get to
Eita, tá pegando embaixo, tá pegando.
which
Pegando.
we have some experience with.
Tá
We did our
pegando embaixo.
suborbital campaign.
Startup Raptor
And
chill.
then Starship will
landing bird.
eventually
Tá pegando legal ali embaixo.
get down to its terminal velocity as
Tem
it's
alguma coisa
floating
acontecendo
down
ali.
to the water. That's just about 200 miles an hour or so.
Olha,
We are
olha,
hearing
o
that.
escudo já tá
We're starting
incandescente
to
ali
chill
na
some of the engines as we
flaps
are, if we make it all the way down to the water, still going to attempt a
superiores já.
landing burn, but still a ways to go. We're at about 64 kilometers in
Coisa
altitude
errada ali.
right now. We made it through what's expected to be the peak heating, but now we're going to start encountering increased pressures as the atmosphere gets thicker and thicker.
Será que a manta térmica do
So we're at
que eles deixaram
63
exposta
kilometers,
tá
so
aqui?
we've already made it farther than we did on our
Olha,
last
olha, olha.
flight when
Legal.
that last signal was coming at
Fagulha
65
saindo.
kilometers.
Uou,
Again,
tá
what
dando uma...
we're really
Ih,
looking
será
at
que,
here
será
is
que
the
caiu uma telha
performance
do
of
flap?
the
Porque
heat
olha, tá
shield,
pegando
the
legal, hein?
flaps, of the seals and the flaps. There's just a whole bunch of different areas that we're keeping a really close eye on as we re-enter.
Eita! Ih, eu acho que deu ruim. Será que deu ruim?
Starship remains on a good entry trajectory.
É estranho isso aí, mas será que ela... Gente, isso aqui tá uma tensão aqui, pelo amor
Looks
de
like we're
Deus.
still on a good
3
trajectory.
minutos.
If you're seeing
3 minutos
little
não,
camera
mas eu acho
moves,
que como a
that's
forma que ela tá
flap
reentrando, que ela
moving as
tá
it continues to
meio que
maintain,
planando na atmosfera,
the attitude
ele
of the
demora um pouco
vehicle
mais
as
pra
it
reentrar.
re-enters.
Tá estranho.
And I mean, not just camera views, but we've got sensors
Mas deve ser
inside the
normal.
ship. We've
A gente
got
nunca
those
viu isso
sensors
mesmo,
down
mas deve
at
ser
the
normal.
very aft end of the vehicle where
É
we
a primeira
pointed out
vez que
we had some
acontece isso,
intentionally
então
missing tiles.
ela deve chegar um pouco
We've got some
chamuscada.
sensors looking at just how hot it's getting around
É
there.
quanta faísca.
We intentionally put those in essentially the least critical part of the heat shield, where if you had any kind of a breach,
Opa, tá dando
wouldn't be
umas
great for
pipocadas ali no flap
reusability, but
superior.
wouldn't be critical for actual making it through the re-entry into the landing.
Falta mais um pouquinho, gente. Mais um pouco. Falta pouco pra chegar. Tá ruim não, falta
58
pouquinho, falta
kilometers,
pouco,
we're
pô.
continuing to descend. Again, right now
Meu
we are
Deus.
over the Indian Ocean. We're actually getting closer
Meu,
and
muita
closer to
atenção
that
nisso, pelo amor de Deus.
expected splashdown point, which is just to the off the
Essas
northwest
essas
corner of
chamuscadas que dá
Australia.
eleva a atenção disso aqui tudo que você tem ideia.
And if you keep an eye on our speed, the speed is dropping. We're hitting the thicker part
Tinha
of
que
the
ver minha
atmosphere
cara
now.
agora,
The
porque
speed's
olha,
going to start
tô...
dropping precipitously. We're going to start getting to transonic pretty soon. And then
Eita, tá
after that,
pegando
we'll get
bem
into
embaixo ali do
subsonic,
flap, hein?
where
Ui, eu
we're
acho que
moving
tá
less
pegando
than the
embaixo do
speed of
flap.
sound, but
Dá problema esse flap.
wow, what a light show so far.
Gente, isso aí não tá me cheirando muito bem não. Oi, vai dar problema, vai dar problema, vai dar problema. Pegou no flap. Vai dar chabu isso aí.
External temperatures are starting to come down.
Vai aguentar não. Aguentar não.
This
Vai
camera
aguentar
view
não.
is looking
Ó.
right at one of the forward
Pegou embaixo do
flaps.
flap. Bem no atuador, gente. Mas não vai, não vai.
And we're strategically
problema,
putting
vai
some
dar ruim.
cameras around the vehicle to just look at the
Dá tchau pro...
the
Ó, as
different
telhas
areas.
soltando. Vai. Ih, tchau. Dá tchau pra Starship.
Looks like we got the flap starting to
O
come apart
flap
a little.
vai soltar. Vai soltar o flap. Vai
Yeah, it
desprender.
does appear that we have a little bit of burn through there.
Vai
We
dar
can
bom não,
see
vai dar bom não.
pieces
Vai
of the
dar,
vehicle
vai dar ruim
flying
isso aí.
off. What a show
Ele não vai
it
aguentar,
has
não.
been. It's been like watching Interstellar
O
or
flap
something.
vai soltar. Se continuar
This
desse
is
jeito.
wild to see
Ó.
this, but the ship is still
É,
coming
gente, não
down,
vai ser dessa vez não.
which is
Sabia.
incredible to
Ó,
see.
o flap tá
How
desintegrando.
far can it go? That is the question.
Keep your eye on the altitude in the bottom right-hand corner. We're at 54 kilometers right
O
now.
flap superior direito
Now,
tá desintegrando.
ultimately, the data is
Não,
the
não vai
payload
aguentar,
today.
não. Não vai
We've been
aguentar, ele vai
saying it
soltar logo,
multiple
logo.
times. Our teams are,
Por isso que a gente-
sitting,
Por isso que a gente
reviewing
tava
this
sem
data
câmera do
live, learning
flap.
where the hot spots are. As you
Ó.
can see, there's an obvious hot
Soltando aos
spot there
poucos, ó, não
with
vai
the
aguentar
flap.
não.
And learning how
Pena.
we can improve this
Pena.
design. The goal was to get as far
Tudo de câmera,
through
pô.
this high heat re-entry as possible. Ideally, we'd love to make it all the
Pô,
way
pior
down
que tinha uma
and
animação que
perform
mostrou alguma coisa
that
parecida com
landing
isso.
burn input
Ah,
maneuver.
pena.
But we may not get that far today. We will see.
Pena.
Again, this is a test. And we are gathering as much data as possible,
Uma pena.
visual data
Que triste, pô.
as well, which we can see here. We are
O
getting a
Flap tá
lot of
aguentando
debris
ainda,
covering the
ele tá
camera on
numa
your screen,
posição,
but
só
we
que
can
tá
still see some of
desmanchando.
those sparks and flames from that high heat as
poxa.
ship is
Tá
making
legal.
its way back down to Earth.
Ship now at 50 kilometers
Sabia que tinha
and
alguma coisa
closing.
acontecendo.
The good news is we still got, oh, looks like that camera lens just cracked. It's safe to say ship's getting a little beat up, but that's to be expected on a test flight. We are still
Ainda não
learning
mais nada.
how
Pô,
to
muda de
improve the
câmera.
ship for total survival and recovery of the high heat reentry.
I'm honestly impressed that we're still getting this live view despite how much debris is coming off of this flap right now.
The fact that we've got it is good news.
Perdeu o sinal. Perdeu o sinal, perdeu a
I
câmera.
may have jinxed it. I apologize.
Caramba, ela tá aguentando até agora, bicho.
Still going. And the teams here
Mais um pouquinho ela
at
chega inteira.
SpaceX are excited, as you can
robusto,
tell
hein?
by the cheering behind us. There's still a
só.
sizable crowd here at Mission Control Center, Hawthorne.
A
Uma hora de
splashdown
voo
is
já.
expected in just about
Eu
4
não
minutes from
acredito
now.
que essa bênção vai chegar.
And we're still
Yeah.
moving. We still have live views.
Sinceramente, eu
Starlink is
tô
doing a
incrédulo
incredible
nisso.
job.
Maximum entry dynamic pressure. External temperatures are dropping.
Caramba, tá.
Okay, good news. Those external pressures are dropping. The question is, how much the ship is left?
Falando que a pressão tá diminuindo
Can't really tell. We
e tá
can still
chegando.
see some of that particulate.
Ah, mas vai dar
coming off.
barrigada, eu acho. Dessa vez dá
And
barrigada.
unfortunately, we do have a cracked camera lens, but for any photographers out there and videographers, we know that's part of the gig sometimes.
Eu
Yeah,
só
and you can
consegui
see that the
pousar com esse
speed is
negócio aqui, eu vou
rapidly
ficar
slowing down.
na
That's
boa de
actually
ver,
really
cara.
great news for us.
Muda de
We
câmera,
want
senhor.
the vehicle
Meu
to
Deus,
be
eu quero
slowing
ver.
down before it splashes down into the ocean.
Meu Deus,
That'll
cara.
help set us up for that flip maneuver,
acreditando
engines
nisso.
first down into the water.
Olha, ali dá pra ver,
So we have
aqui dá
seen
pra ver
this
a
flip
frente do
maneuver
flap que tá
demonstrated
queimando
on
ainda.
previous high altitude flight tests.
Alguma telha soltou do flap
serial number 8.
e...
Oh,
dá pra
more
ver o flap.
views.
Nossa, cozinhando
Or,
ali.
I should say, more light
Alguma
coming
telha soltou do
through
flap
the
e
view that we
começou a
have
cozinhar ele
through
por
that,
dentro, foi
cracked
desintegrando aos
and dirtied lens there. But yeah, so we're hoping
Uau.
that this flip maneuver
Mas
that we
é
can
incrível que
pull it
a
off.
Chip conseguiu manter
As
a
soon as we
integridade,
get those views
manter a
back, if we
posição
can
dela
get
mesmo com o
them,
flap indo de
if the
Vasco.
ship is still around, we will bring it
Vehicle
back
has
to you.
passed maximum dynamic pressure.
That is great news. Maximum dynamic pressure being the moment in which the
Máxima
vehicle
pressão
experiences the greatest
dinâmica.
amount of
Conseguiu passar na máxima pressão
aerodynamic
dinâmica da
pressure.
reentrada.
Speed still dropping. We're now at 37 kilometers
Viu?
above
É
the ocean.
inacreditável.
Just like Flight 3, we are targeting a splashdown in the water in the Indian Ocean.
3.000 graus a
We don't
reentrada
have a lot of view
aguentou.
right now, but because we're still
Caraca,
getting
bicho, não tô
data
acreditando
and
nisso.
telemetry, that does tell us that ship is still doing okay at least.
Caraca, ela vai conseguir.
And there
A
we got
bicha
that live
moscado,
view.
mas tá conseguindo. Rapaz,
Crowd very excited to
esse
see that
voo
view.
tá...
Despite
Meu,
not
o
being able
flap
to see
ainda
very
tá atuando. Eu não tô... O flap tá carcomido de reentrada e ele tá se movendo. Como é que isso é possível, cara?
Now 30 kilometers, now 29
Ah,
above
meu, não
the
pode ser
ocean.
verdade um negócio desse. O flap tá se movendo apesar de tá tudo carcomido de plasma.
Sounds like the vehicle's traveling, as we just heard, Mach 2, which is, looks like we...
Cara, isso não pode ser verdade, cara. Não é possível.
I thought maybe
Não é
it might clear up. It is a
possível.
little bit,
Eita. Ela deu uma
now at
empinada
T+1
agora pra
hour,
baixo.
3
Deu uma
minutes and 13
empinada.
seconds
bruta.
into Starship Flight 4,
Mas eu acho que ela tá se posicionando pra...
hoping that the ship can
pra
hang on.
fazer a
It's
descida.
probably
Eita,
potentially
ela deu uma
hanging on
empinada
by a
legal
couple
agora.
of bolts and threads. But it's still going,
Pera,
and that
tá
is excellent
estabilizando.
news.
Voltando
That
pra posição.
deceleration is looking incredible.
Nice.
We're about to go under
Eita,
1,000
deu uma
kilometers per
embicada.
hour.
Yeah.
Starship is at 20 kilometers altitude.
Deu uma embicada
Now keep in
violenta
mind
agora.
that even
Pera,
though
tá
we can't
estabilizando?
see
Será?
anything, the data itself is what
Estranho.
we really
Starship
are
is subsonic.
subsonic. They're telling us it's traveling
Meu, ela tá
below
chegando.
the speed
Eu
of sound.
não... Mano, isso não pode ser possível, cara. Eu não tô vendo isso, eu não tô vendo isso.
That movement means the flaps are
Cara, o
actuating.
flap tá inteiro. O flap tá inteiro.
But we are, unfortunately, we can't see through the lens, but we're still
O
getting
flap
the feed.
tá inteiro.
Starship is now 11
Não
kilometers
acredito,
over the
cara.
ocean. All this data is incredibly important, even if you
O
know.
flap
it
tá
breaks up right
atuando
now.
depois de secar comigo na entrada.
Flap actuated.
Olha isso, cara, tem um rombo no flap. Cara, eu não tô vendo isso, isso é real.
Through 10 kilometers altitude.
Okay, the next milestone will be initiation.
Cara, como que esse
of the
negócio... Olha o rombo no
maneuver and
flap.
land and burn. Keep an eye on the bottom
Cara, tem
right
um
corner
buraco
of your
no
screen
flap e
for
ele tá
those 3
funcionando
center engines
ainda.
to relight. They will gimbal or angle so that the ship
Cara, olha o
flips
tamanho
itself
do
back up
buraco.
vertical and hopefully lands in a vertical
Meu
position.
Deus.
And the crowd is very excited to get this view of that flap still
Starship is
maneuvering.
passing through 5 kilometers altitude.
Meu Deus, cara. Eita.
This is incredible. We're getting very close to splashdown.
These fireflies are such a good sign of life right now.
Tá chegando. Será que ele vai
We can
conseguir?
see more, but we'll take it.
Eu acho que vai dar uma barrigada, hein?
Starship is at 2 kilometers altitude. Terminal
Opa,
blocked.
opa, opa, opa. Ah, vai dar uma barrigada.
Landing burn startup for Starship.
Opa, virou, 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 virou. Mano, o flap tá... Meu, isso não pode ser verdade, cara. O flap soltou.
Nominal chamber pressure.
Cara, isso não... Eu não tô vendo... Mano, isso é inacreditável. Ele pousou. Ela pousou.
Landing burn shutdown.
Meu Deus, isso não é possível, cara.
The landing burn shutdown was commanded.
Não é possível que ela pousou, cara. Meu Deus, cara, isso é inacreditável. Ai, cara.
Wow. I mean, it was a little bit of use your imagination
Meu
as
Deus.
you were going down with what
Eu
we could
tô
actually
sem
see, but
palavras.
we were able to hear the ship did its landing burn. It sounded
Starship
like we
landing
might have
burn
got
shutdown.
2
Meu
engines.
Deus. Isso é inacreditável.
There's the
Não
final
é
call for landing burn
possível
shutdown,
isso.
but we'll
Não
go
é
back through all the data,
possível.
but we did get confirmation
Eu não
that a
vi
landing
isso.
burn took place. Starship made it through re-entry
Meu
and did
Deus.
its first ever landing burn.
Como...
From South Texas to the
Caraca,
other side of the earth, Starship is in the water.
Cara,
What a day.
o flap cedeu na hora que bateu.
What a day, guys!
Ele
Yeah,
terminou
that
o flip.
was absolutely incredible. We we
Gente,
got
eu vou
views
terminar a live
pretty
por
much
aqui.
the whole way down.
Mentira, não vai terminar não. Vou ver até onde
Analysis
vai
said it
ser.
could do it. We
Vou pegar
weren't
ar
sure
já
if it
volto.
was going to be able to happen, but Starlink powered through, and we were able to get signal. We started to get some debris on the cameras and everything, but we were able to see it. So, I mean, what a day. Just recapping, everything started off today. We lifted off from here in Starbase just about an hour ago. It feels like a lifetime. Successful super heavy ascent, boost back, and its own splashdown in the Gulf. Ship made it to space, kept its attitude. Successful re-entry through peak heating. We got to see it under flap control through the atmosphere, and we got call out of our first ever ship landing burn after launch into space. So, just really incredible. So I'm going to take some time to collect myself, but wow, that was incredible. I can't wait for the next one. Over to you guys.
It was so loud here. I haven't heard the crowd get that loud probably since liftoff of Flight 1, honestly.
That was incredible. Congratulations to our teammates, to everyone who supported the Starship program. Thanks to all of our future customers for your support. And we'd also like to thank the people of Cameron County, Texas, as well as the Coast Guard, the Federal Aviation Administration, and the government of Mexico. And since Starship got a little bit toasty from that extreme heat of reentry, and we've got our very own Starship right here, let's have a toast of our own.
I've been waiting all morning for this.
Okay, may I?
Light me up. Yeah. Just like Starship, I like this toasty.
Não, os caras fazendo graça, bicho.
Now, we've got more Starship test flights coming to you soon. Be sure to follow the SpaceX account on X for more updates from today's test flight and future Starship tests. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.
Gente, obrigadão aí por abração pra vocês, que esse dia foi emocionante. Grande salve pra todo mundo e obrigado por quem veio aí, apareceu um pouquinho. Grande abraço pra todo mundo e até a próxima live, viu?